How much training do you need to successfully complete a race? And specifically, I'm talking about weekly training volume and your long run. So welcome to the Average Old Guy, where I'm going to pull 50 years of experience together to try and help you answer that question. But unfortunately, like so many questions in health and fitness, the answer depends. And I'm going to try to help guide beginner runners or somebody looking to move up from a 5K, say, to a longer distance, and help you make some plans and prioritize your training to do just that, to finish successfully and have a great race. Right up front, let me say that I am not and never have been a high mileage runner. And for me, there's two main reasons. One is I just have a lot of injuries from motorcycling and skateboarding that really tend to come back when I increase my mileage. And two, I just get bored running a lot of miles. I'm not a very high mileage person for those two reasons. But I do have a lot of experience with races, everywhere from a half mile to a 50K. And since I'm on a long run today, I'm going to talk about long runs first, and then we'll talk about weekly mileage. So in my experience, the typical long run for something 10K or less, so a mile, 5K, 10K, needs to be the race distance. So if you're going to run a 5K, you at least need to have a run of 5K, or hopefully more, and up to about a 10K. So for a 10K race, I would still recommend a 6-mile run to be your long run, and you can definitely get by with that. Now, as you move up from there, and let's say 15K to probably 20 miles, it's my belief and my experience that you can get by with a long run of half the race distance. So let's say you're running a 10-mile race. Your long run could be 5 miles, and you can get by with that as long as your weekly mileage is a little higher, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But even up to, say, 20 miles, I think you can get by, and I've done it, so I know you can get by with a 10-mile long run and still finish a 20-mile race. Now, over 20 miles, I think there are a lot of factors that come into play that can affect your long run. So for instance, how long the run is. Are you doing a marathon? Are you doing a 50K? You doing a 50-miler? What surface are you on? You on a trail like this? Or are you on the road? Because that does make a big difference. What is your training history? How long have you been training? How long have you been running? And what's your injury history? Which for me is a huge factor, because it pretty much limits all my mileage. And while I firmly believe up to about 20 miles you can get by with running half the race distance as your long run, over 20 miles, I just don't believe you can be successful with that strategy. I don't think you'll have a very good marathon if your longest run is a half marathon. And certainly going longer than that, your long runs are going to have to be a substantial amount either of distance or time. And that becomes really important, especially on these long trail runs, is how much time you spend on your feet, not so much the distance. Let's say you're running a road marathon. I would say you need at least 3 runs 15 miles or over to adequately prepare to finish that. And probably like a 15, a 18, and a 20-mile run would be sufficient to get you through that race and feeling okay at the end. Now, you're not going to be probably very competitive, but I believe that would certainly be enough to finish a race of that distance. And then as you move up from there, it's just going to be a matter of time. Do you run 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours? And that can just be based on some training plan or somebody else's experience that you're drawing from. So let's recap the long run. Anything up to about 10K, I believe you should be running the actual race distance as your long run at a minimum. And then from 10K up to, I would say, 20 miles, you need to be running at least 10 kilometers up to a minimum of half of the race distance. And I think you can be successful in any distance between those using that formula. Anything 20 miles and over is just a lot of factors, but I think you should run at least 2/3 to 3/4 of the race distance more than once. And for longer races than a marathon, especially trail ultras that take a really long time, you need to put some significant time on your feet to be prepared to run a race like that. So now let's talk about training volume. As I said in the beginning, I've never been a high mileage runner for various reasons, but I successfully run a sub 3 hour marathon. I've placed in my age group in a mountain ultra 50K. And for those two specific events, my longest week for the marathon was 35 miles. My longest week for the 50K was 45 miles. And those were peak weeks. So in general, I was running way less mileage than that. Now, to be fair, during the marathon, I was also running triathlons at the same time and training for an Ironman. So while my week running was only 35 miles, I was putting in 150 to 200 miles on the bike and about 10,000 meters of swimming. So I did get plenty of aerobic work in. And when I ran the 50K Ultra, I was putting in consistent 30-mile weeks for 13, 14, 15 weeks. And so I did have a great base, and I was mountain biking as well, hiking, rucking. So I was, again, doing a little more than just running. And I think if you're going to run low mileage because of injuries or just because you don't have the ability to maintain it mentally, like I don't, then you definitely have to put in some additional aerobic work on top of that. So let's go with those race distances again and see about some mileage for a week. Up to, again, maybe 10K, I believe, and I've done it and I've seen it done, you can easily get by with 12 miles a week and spread out, because I do believe frequency is more important than the total distance. So I believe you're much better off running 4 3-mile runs than you are running 2 6-mile runs. And definitely you're better off running 2 6-mile runs than 1 12-mile run per week. Well, I think frequency is a huge factor on top of your overall distance. Now I think for 10K up to about 20 miles, you probably need to be putting in a good 20-mile consistent week and running at a minimum 3 to 4 days, especially if as you approach that 20-mile mark, a 25K or a 20-mile run, you definitely need to be running 4 days a week, potentially 5, and getting that long run in at about half the distance of the race. And then as you get up to the marathon distance, you're going to have to increase some, especially during your build-up. But with that, you always got to weigh the risk factors of being injured versus a marginal gain, because there is a point of diminishing returns, and especially as you get older. Because again, as I said before, the number one key as you get older is maintaining consistency. And if you get injured, There's no way to be consistent. So it's better to be safe and a little bit slower than to push the limit and get injured. Now keep in mind that everything I've said here really only pertains to a beginning racer or somebody who's been running short races, maybe 5Ks for a little while, and wants to move up. If you want to be competitive, age group competitive, or if you want to set some pretty aggressive goals for yourself, then I don't think this is going to be a plan that will probably be able to work for you in those instances. You're going to have to put in a little more work, and you're definitely going to have to put in some dedicated speed work. I don't believe you need speed work just to finish a race of any distance, but certainly to be competitive, you are definitely going to have to put in tempo runs and maybe even some dedicated track work. So I hope this was helpful, and keep in mind also that I would say once you get to a certain level of base fitness, at least half of racing is mental. And you can work on the mental aspect anytime. You don't have to run fast, you don't have to run long. You can go on a day when you just don't feel good and go out and run. And those kind of runs really work on your mental game. And again, once you get to a certain level of fitness, that mental game is going to give you the edge every time over the physical gains. So as you get older, especially after you're 50, don't jeopardize your consistency for marginal gains. It's just never worth it. It's hard to recover from any gap in your consistency, and it's never worth a marginal gain if you're not a professional athlete, especially if you're over 50 years old. Now, if you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. Obviously, everybody's different, and everybody will have a different experience. So if you've had a radically different experience from what I've outlined here, let me know. Let's talk about it. And again, I'm going by what's worked for me over the years, and I think is a bare minimum to help you have a successful race. And that's all I'm looking for at this point in my life. And I hope you guys can get some benefit from this as well. So thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it, and we will see you on the next one.